The smoke from my backyard bonfire curled into the November evening sky, while I stood there with a beer in one hand and a poker in the other, watching the flames dance against the cool Arizona air. I had been looking forward to this bonfire all week, especially after pulling 3 consecutive double shifts at the Prescott Fire Department. The warmth felt good against my face, and the crackling sound of burning wood was almost therapeutic after the chaos of the last few days. My name is Carter Newsome, and I had lived in the Ridgeview Estates subdivision of Prescott, Arizona for about 5 years. The neighborhood was decent enough, with well-maintained homes and families who mostly minded their own business. The only real problem was the homeowner association, specifically the HOA president. A woman named Brenda Whitmore, who seemed to believe her position gave her unlimited authority over everyone's lives. I was just settling into my camping chair when I heard the sharp click of heels on my driveway. I knew that sound. It was the same sound that preceded every unnecessary complaint, every petty violation notice, and every attempt to micromanage how I lived in my own home. "Excuse me, Carter." Brenda's voice cut through the peaceful evening like nails on a chalkboard. She appeared around the corner of my house, her blonde bob perfectly styled despite the late hour, wearing a blazer that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "What exactly do you think you are doing?" I took a slow sip of my beer before responding. "Having a bonfire, Brenda." "It's Friday night. I'm relaxing." Her face flushed red and she pulled out her phone, holding it up like it was some kind of weapon. "This is completely unacceptable. You cannot just light fires whenever you want. There are rules in this community, and I will not tolerate this blatant disregard for safety and regulations." I set my beer down on the armrest of my chair and looked at her calmly. "Brenda, I checked the weather conditions. The wind speed is minimal. I have a proper fire ring, a water hose within reach, and a fire extinguisher right there by the back door. Everything is completely safe and legal." "Legal?" She scoffed, her voice rising to that particular pitch that suggested she was about to make this everyone's problem. "I seriously doubt that. I am calling the police right now. This is dangerous, reckless, and I am certain you are violating multiple ordinances." "Go ahead," I said, leaning back in my chair. I was not worried. As the fire chief for the Prescott Fire Department, I knew exactly what the regulations were. More importantly, I knew I was well within my rights to have this fire. Brenda's eyes narrowed as she dialed. She stepped away from me, speaking in hushed but urgent tones to whoever answered. I could make out phrases like "immediate danger" and "refuses to comply" and "completely out of control." I shook my head and added another log to the fire, which was burning perfectly in its contained ring, nowhere near any structures or vegetation that could catch. About 15 minutes later, I heard sirens approaching. Brenda stood near my fence with her arms crossed, a triumphant smile on her face. 2 police officers appeared at my back gate, and I recognized them immediately. Officer Mike Santos and Officer Jennifer Cole had both worked with the fire department on multiple occasions. "Evening, Chief," Mike said, giving me a nod as he entered the yard. His eyes scanned the fire setup, and I could see him noting all the safety measures I had in place. Brenda's mouth fell open. "Chief? What do you mean, Chief?" Jennifer walked over to inspect the fire ring more closely. "Madam, are you the one who called about a dangerous fire?" "Yes, I did," Brenda said, recovering quickly. "This fire is completely illegal. He cannot just burn things in a residential area. There are regulations, and as the HOA president, I am responsible for ensuring all residents follow the rules." Mike pulled out a notepad, though I could see the slight smile he was trying to suppress. "Madam, Can you tell me which specific regulation you believe is being violated? The burn ban, obviously, Brenda snapped. Everyone knows you cannot have open fires during burn ban season. That was when I stood up and walked over to join the conversation. Brenda, there is no burn ban in effect right now. The last burn ban was lifted 3 weeks ago after we got that rain system through here. Her face went from pink to bright red. That is not true. I saw it on the county website. Jennifer looked at me, then back at Brenda. Madam, Chief Newsome would definitely know about any active burn bans. He is literally the person who helps enforce them as the fire chief. I do not care what his job title is, Brenda said, her voice getting louder. He is violating HOA regulations. Our community guidelines clearly state that all outdoor fires must be approved by the HOA board 72 hours in advance. Now it was my turn to speak up. Actually, Brenda, that rule was challenged and overturned 8 months ago. Remember the meeting where the lawyer explained that the HOA cannot create regulations that are more restrictive than city ordinances when it comes to fire safety? The city allows recreational fires in approved containers without prior notice, as long as they meet safety requirements. Your rule was deemed unenforceable. Brenda's expression shifted from angry to furious. I do not remember any such meeting. You were there, I said calmly. You voted against removing the rule, but you were outvoted by the rest of the board. It's in the meeting minutes. Mike cleared his throat. So, Chief, just to confirm for our report, this fire is legal and safe, absolutely. Want to inspect it yourself? Mike and Jennifer walked around the fire ring, checked the clearances, noted the safety equipment, and took a few photos for their report. The whole time, Brenda stood there sputtering, trying to find some other angle to attack me from. What about the smoke? She finally said. The smoke is going into my yard. That is creating a nuisance. Jennifer looked up at the minimal smoke rising from the clean burning wood. Madam, a small amount of smoke from a legal recreational fire does not constitute a nuisance under city ordinances. This is ridiculous, Brenda huffed. I am the HOA president, and I am telling you this is a violation. I demand you put out that fire immediately. I had been patient up to this point, but something in her tone pushed me over the edge of my usual tolerance. Brenda, the officers have confirmed I am not breaking any laws. You called the police and made false statements about a dangerous situation. That is actually something you could be cited for. Her eyes went wide. Excuse me? I did no such thing. I reported a legitimate concern. Mike flipped back through his notes. Madam, according to the dispatch recording, you stated that there was a large, out-of-control fire threatening nearby properties. You also claimed there was an active burn ban being violated. Both of those statements are demonstrably false. I said what I needed to say to get you here quickly, Brenda retorted. If I had just said someone was having a bonfire, you probably would not have responded. Jennifer and Mike exchanged a look. Madam, Jennifer said carefully, you cannot exaggerate or lie to emergency services to get a faster response. That is a misuse of emergency resources. Are you seriously taking his side? Brenda's voice had reached a new octave. He is the one breaking the rules. What rules? I asked. Point to one actual rule I am breaking right now. Brenda fumbled with her phone, pulling up what I assumed was the HOA website. She scrolled frantically, her face getting redder by the second as she clearly could not find what she was looking for. Finally, she looked up with a different expression, one that made me immediately suspicious. The noise ordinance, she declared. Your fire is creating excessive noise after 9 p.m. I looked at my watch. It was 8:15. It is not after 9, and the fire is not making any unusual noise. "It will be after 9 soon enough," she said smugly, "and I am sure you will keep this going past the allowed time." Mike closed his notepad. "Madam, we cannot issue a citation for something that might happen in the future. If you have a noise complaint after 9, you can call the non-emergency line. But right now, there is no violation occurring." Brenda looked like she was about to explode. Her perfectly manicured hands clenched into fists, and she took a step toward me. "This is not over, Carter. I will find something. You cannot just ignore HOA authority." "I am not ignoring anything," I said evenly. "I am following all actual laws and regulations. If you want to keep harassing me about legal activities on my own property, that is your choice, but I will document every interaction." The officers wrapped up their report and headed out, with Mike giving me a sympathetic pat on the shoulder as he left. Brenda stood in my yard for another few minutes, clearly trying to think of something else to complain about, before finally storming off with a final warning that she would be watching me. I sat back down in my chair and tried to reclaim the peaceful evening I had planned, but the relaxation was gone. This was not the first time Brenda had targeted me, and I knew it would not be the last. She seemed to have a personal vendetta against anyone who did not bow to her authority, and being fire chief only made it worse in her eyes, because I actually knew which of her rules were bogus. The following Monday, I was at the fire station doing paperwork when my deputy chief, Robert Matthews, knocked on my door frame. "Hey Carter, you got a minute?" "Sure, what's up?" Robert came in and sat down, looking uncomfortable. "I got a weird call this morning from the city council's office. Apparently, someone filed a formal complaint about you having an illegal fire at your residence." I leaned back in my chair. "Let me guess. Brenda Whitmore. How did you know? She called the cops on me Friday night for having a bonfire." When the officers confirmed I was not breaking any laws, she threatened to keep coming after me. "I guess she is following through." Robert rubbed his face. "Carter, this is such a waste of everyone's time. The city attorney's office has to investigate every complaint filed. They are asking for documentation that the fire was legal and properly maintained." "Not a problem. I took photos before I started the fire, showing the setup and safety equipment. Mike Santos and Jennifer Cole from PD were there and documented everything. Their report should back up that it was completely legal." I know. It is just frustrating that she is using official channels to harass you because she has some kind of personal problem." "Welcome to my life," I said. "She has been like this since I moved in. I think she hates that I do not treat her like she is royalty." Robert stood up to leave, then paused. "You know, there might be something else going on here. My wife is friends with Linda Chen, who lives in your neighborhood. Linda mentioned that Brenda has been pushing really hard to get the HOA to ban all outdoor fires completely. Apparently, she wants to use your bonfire as an example of why they need stricter rules." That actually explained a lot. So she is trying to manufacture a crisis to justify new regulations. That would be my guess. Just watch your back, man. People like her do not like being proven wrong, and they will keep escalating. Robert was right about the escalation. Over the next 2 weeks, I received 3 HOA violation notices. The first was for leaving my trash cans visible from the street after pickup day, even though I had brought them in within the allowed time frame. The second was for having a vehicle parked on my driveway that was not currently registered, which was absurd because all my vehicles were properly registered. The third claimed my front lawn exceeded the maximum allowed grass height. Each violation came with a threat of fines and a hearing before the HOA board. Each one was complete nonsense that I could easily dispute, but it was the principle of the thing that bothered me. Brenda was abusing her position to target me specifically, and I was getting tired of it. I decided to do some research into the HOA regulations and Brenda's activities as president. Arizona has pretty specific laws about how HOAs are supposed to operate, and I had a feeling Brenda might not be following all of them. I requested copies of all HOA meeting minutes, financial records, and board communications for the past 2 years, which I was legally entitled to as a homeowner. Brenda responded by saying she would get them to me, eventually, but weeks went by with nothing. Under Arizona law, HOAs are required to provide these documents within 10 business days of a written request. I sent a certified letter reminding her of this legal obligation. She responded with a letter of her own, stating that I was harassing the HOA board and threatening legal action if I did not cease my intimidation tactics. It was becoming clear that Brenda was not just a petty tyrant. She was potentially breaking actual laws regarding HOA management. I decided to attend the next HOA board meeting to see what was really going on. The meeting was held on a Tuesday evening at the community center. About 20 homeowners showed up, which was more than usual. I took a seat in the back and watched as Brenda called the meeting to order. She sat at a table in the front with 3 other board members: Phil Davidson, the vice president, Susan Montgomery, the treasurer, and James Park, the secretary. Brenda started with announcements about upcoming community events, then moved on to old business. When she opened the floor for new business, I raised my hand. Her smile froze when she saw me. "Yes, Carter," I stood up. "I submitted a formal request for HOA documents over a month ago, as is my right under Arizona revised statutes. I still have not received those documents." "When can I expect to get them?" Brenda's jaw tightened. "We are working on compiling everything you requested. It takes time to gather all those materials. The law requires you to provide them within 10 business days. It has been over 30 days. That is a violation of state law." A murmur went through the other homeowners. Phil Davidson leaned over to whisper something to Brenda, but she waved him off. "I am aware of the timeline, Carter. However, your request was excessively broad and burdensome. We are not required to fulfill requests that are clearly intended to harass the board. I requested standard documents that should be readily available," I countered. "Meeting minutes, financial records, and official communications. These are exactly the kinds of documents the law says homeowners can access. There is nothing harassing about requesting public HOA records." Susan Montgomery spoke up for the first time. "Actually, Brenda, he is right. We should have provided those documents weeks ago. I have most of the financial records ready. I can get them to Carter by the end of the week." Brenda shot Susan a look that could have melted steel. "We will discuss this later. Carter, you will get your documents when the board determines they are ready." Another homeowner, a woman I recognized as Linda Chen, stood up. "I have a question about the outdoor fire ban that was proposed last month. The agenda said it would be voted on tonight, but I do not see it listed anywhere." Brenda shuffled some papers. "That item has been postponed pending further research." "What research?" Linda asked. "The city ordinances already cover fire safety. Why do we need additional HOA restrictions?" "Because some residents do not exercise proper judgment," Brenda said, looking directly at me. "We have had multiple incidents of dangerous fire conditions in this community." "That is not true," I said, my voice rising slightly. "There have been 0 fire incidents in this neighborhood for the past 3 years. I checked with the fire marshal's office. If there were dangerous conditions, there would be documented responses." More murmuring from the crowd. James Park, the secretary, pulled out his laptop and started typing. After a moment, he looked up. Carter is correct. I am looking at the county fire incident database right now. There are no records of any fire-related calls to Ridgeview Estates in the past 3 years, except for the police response to Carter's property, which was logged as a false alarm. Brenda's face had gone from red to purple. That database might not be complete. It is maintained by the fire marshal's office, I said. It is the official record. You claimed multiple incidents. Where are they? I do not have to justify every statement to you, Carter. This meeting is not about your personal vendetta against the HOA. My vendetta. I could not keep the incredulity out of my voice. You are the one who has sent me 3 bogus violation notices in the past 2 weeks. You are the one who filed a false complaint with the city about my legal bonfire. You are the one who is refusing to provide documents I am legally entitled to. If anyone has a vendetta here, it is you against me. The room erupted in conversation. Several other homeowners started shouting questions at Brenda, asking about violation notices they had received and whether those were also bogus. Phil Davidson tried to call for order, but it took several minutes to get everyone to quiet down. This meeting is adjourned, Brenda announced abruptly, standing up and grabbing her papers. You cannot just adjourn without a vote, Susan said, and we have not covered half the agenda items. I am the president, and I am adjourning this meeting, Brenda snapped. She turned and walked out of the community center, leaving the other 3 board members sitting there looking confused and embarrassed. After the meeting, several neighbors came up to talk to me. It turned out I was not the only one who had been on the receiving end of Brenda's harassment. Linda Chen had been cited for having the wrong color flowers in her front yard. Another neighbor, Tom Rodriguez, had been fined for parking his work truck in his own driveway overnight. Yet another, Patricia Wells, had been threatened with legal action for installing solar panels without HOA approval, even though Arizona law specifically protects the right to install solar panels. We should do something about this, Linda said. She is out of control. The problem is she keeps getting re-elected, Tom added. Not enough people show up to vote, and she runs unopposed most of the time. When is the next election? I asked. James Park had walked over to join our conversation. Actually, it is coming up in 3 months. And I think we need some new candidates. I am not running again. I only joined the board because I thought I could help the community, but Brenda blocks everything I try to do. She treats the HOA like her personal fiefdom. An idea was forming in my mind. What if we organized? Get people to actually show up and vote. Run candidates who will follow the actual rules instead of making up new ones to push personal agendas. You should run, Linda said immediately. You know the regulations. You have been standing up to her and people respect you. I do not know, I said hesitantly. I work a lot of hours at the fire department. I am not sure I have time to be HOA president. It does not have to be president, James said. We need good people on the board in any capacity. Even having 1 or 2 more reasonable voices would make a huge difference. Over the next few days, I thought about it seriously. I had never wanted to be involved in HOA politics, but it was becoming clear that if good people did not step up, tyrants like Brenda would continue to abuse their power. I decided to run for a board position. When I submitted my candidacy paperwork, Brenda tried to reject it on a technicality, claiming I had not lived in the neighborhood long enough. When I pointed out that the bylaws only required 2 years of residence, and I had been there for 5, she said there was a question about whether my property was truly in good standing due to the pending violations. Susan Montgomery, who was apparently getting fed up with Brenda's behavior, stepped in and confirmed that my candidacy was valid. The violations Brenda referenced had all been successfully disputed and removed from my record. The campaign was not really a campaign in the traditional sense. I simply went door to door, introducing myself to neighbors I had not met yet and talking about my vision for an HOA that served the community instead of controlling it. I talked about following actual laws instead of making up arbitrary rules. I emphasized transparency and accountability in HOA finances and decision-making. Brenda, meanwhile, went negative. She sent out flyers to every house in the neighborhood claiming I was dangerous, citing the Bonfire incident. She said I had been investigated for illegal activities and only escaped consequences because of my position with the fire department. She suggested that I was running for the board solely to evade accountability for my violations of community standards. It was all lies, of course, but the flyers looked official and probably convinced some people who did not know any better. I responded by posting actual facts on the neighborhood social media page. I shared the police report from the Bonfire incident, which clearly stated that no violations had occurred. I shared the documents showing that all of Brenda's violation notices against me had been successfully disputed. I shared Arizona's HOA laws and pointed out where Brenda had violated them. The thing about tyrants is that they usually make a lot of enemies along the way, and Brenda was no exception. As more people started paying attention to the election, more stories came out about her behavior. It turned out she had been selectively enforcing rules, citing people she did not like while ignoring identical situations with people she was friendly with. She had allegedly used HOA funds to pay for personal expenses, though Susan said she was having trouble getting complete financial records to verify that. 2 weeks before the election, something interesting happened. I was at the fire station when I got a call from Emily Rodriguez, who worked in the city's planning and zoning department. "Hey Carter, this is kind of awkward, but I thought you should know something. Brenda Whitmore came in today trying to get a burn ban imposed on Prescott." "What? On the whole city?" "Well, she started with that, but when we explained that was not how it works, she asked specifically about Ridgeview Estates. She wanted us to declare it a high-risk fire zone that would require special restrictions on outdoor fires. That is insane. Ridgeview is one of the lowest-risk neighborhoods in the city. We have good defensible space, updated fire codes, and easy access for emergency vehicles." "I know. We told her we could not just declare an area high risk without actual evidence of elevated risk. She got pretty upset and said she would go over our heads to the city council." "Let her try. The city council is not going to overrule your professional assessment, especially when there is no legitimate safety concern." "That is what I figured, but she seemed really determined." I got the impression this was personal for her. "It absolutely is. Thanks for the heads up, Emily." After I hung up, I sat there thinking about what Brenda was trying to do. She was not just being petty anymore, she was actively trying to manipulate city government to support her vendetta. That crossed a line from annoying to potentially illegal. I called the city attorney's office and asked to speak with someone about HOA oversight. I was connected to Martin Hughes, an assistant city attorney who handled HOA disputes. "Mr. Hughes, I need to report what I believe is an attempt to manipulate city processes for personal reasons," I said, and then explained what Emily had told me. Martin listened carefully, asked several questions, and then said, "That is concerning, but not necessarily illegal unless she made false statements in her petition. However, given what you have told me about the other issues, her refusal to provide HOA documents and the selective enforcement of rules, I think we should look into this more thoroughly." Can you document everything you have told me? Absolutely. I have been keeping records of every interaction. Good. Send me everything you have got. I cannot promise we will pursue charges, but if there are violations of state HOA laws, we need to address them. Over the next week, I compiled everything: copies of Brenda's violation notices and my successful appeals, the certified letter requesting documents and her refusal to provide them, testimony from other homeowners about selective enforcement, the police report from the Bonfire incident, Emily's account of Brenda's attempt to get a burn ban imposed. It was a damning collection of evidence. I was not the only one documenting Brenda's behavior. Susan Montgomery had apparently reached her breaking point and had started her own investigation into the HOA finances. What she found was deeply troubling. Susan called me 3 days before the election, her voice shaking. "Carter, we need to talk. Can you meet me somewhere private?" We met at a coffee shop on the other side of town. Susan arrived with a manila folder stuffed with documents, looking nervous and exhausted. "I think Brenda has been embezzling from the HOA," she said without preamble. I set down my coffee. "Are you sure?" "Pretty sure. Look at these." She spread out bank statements and receipts across the table. "These are HOA expenses from the past 18 months. Notice anything odd?" I scanned through them. There were multiple charges to a company called Premium Property Services for landscape maintenance, totaling over $30,000. That seems high for our neighborhood. It is. And here is the thing: I cannot find Premium Property Services anywhere. No business license, no website, no listing in any business directory. I think it is a fake company. You think Brenda created a shell company to funnel HOA money to herself? That is exactly what I think. Look at this. Susan pulled out another document. This is the incorporation paperwork for Premium Property Services. It was registered 2 years ago. The registered agent is listed as BW Enterprises. BW, Brenda Whitmore. Right. And when I cross-referenced the address listed for Premium Property Services with county records, it is a P.O. box that is also registered to Brenda. This was bigger than I had realized. Embezzlement from an HOA was not just a civil matter. It was criminal fraud. "Susan, you need to report this to the police." "I know. I am scared, though. Brenda is vindictive, and I do not know what she might do. She cannot do anything if she is being investigated for fraud, and if you have this much evidence, there is a good chance she will be charged." Susan took a deep breath and nodded. "Okay. Will you come with me to the police station?" We went that afternoon. Detective Sarah Chen took our statement and reviewed all of Susan's documentation. Her expression grew more serious as she flipped through the pages. "This is substantial," she said finally. "Mrs. Montgomery, I am going to need to keep these documents as evidence. We will need to bring in a forensic accountant to verify the fraud, but based on what I am seeing here, there is definitely probable cause to open an investigation." "What happens now?" Susan asked. "Now we investigate. We will pull bank records, interview witnesses, and build a case. It might take some time, but if the evidence supports what you have shown me, we will pursue charges." "Will she know I am the one who reported it?" "Eventually, yes. This will become a matter of public record if charges are filed. But we will do everything we can to move quickly once we have enough evidence to make an arrest." The next 2 days were tense. Susan and I had agreed not to tell anyone else about the police investigation yet, but it was hard to act normal at neighborhood events and HOA functions knowing what we knew. The election was the day after tomorrow, and I wondered if Brenda would even still be in the running by then. As it turned out, the police worked faster than I expected. The day before the election, Detective Chen called me. "Carter, we have moved quickly on this. The forensic accountant confirmed the fraud. We have a warrant for Brenda Whitmore's arrest. We are bringing her in this afternoon. That is fast work. Once we had the initial evidence from Mrs. Montgomery, the pieces fell into place quickly. The fake company, the bank transfers, the false invoicing, it is all documented. Mrs. Whitmore made the mistake of keeping good records of her fraud. What are the charges? Theft by fraud, forgery of business documents, and embezzlement. Given the amount involved, over $30,000, these are felony charges. She is looking at significant prison time if convicted. I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. I had not liked Brenda, and she had certainly made my life difficult, but it was still sobering to think about someone throwing their life away over money and power. The arrest happened around 4 that afternoon. I heard about it within an hour because Linda Chen, whose daughter went to school with Detective Chen's son, got a text from the detective. By evening, it was all over the neighborhood social media. The reactions were mixed. Some people were shocked and refused to believe it. Others said they had always suspected something was off about Brenda. A few people tried to defend her, saying she had been set up or that someone was out to get her. But as more details emerged about the fake company and the bank transfers, it became harder to deny what had happened. The HOA election went forward as planned. With Brenda arrested and out of the running, it was mostly unopposed candidates filling the board positions. I won a seat easily, along with Linda Chen and Tom Rodriguez. Susan Montgomery agreed to stay on as treasurer to help clean up the financial mess Brenda had left behind. Our first action as the new board was to hire a lawyer to help us navigate the legal implications of Brenda's fraud. We needed to figure out how to recover the stolen money, how to ensure our financial controls were strong enough to prevent future fraud, and how to handle the various pending violations and disputes from Brenda's reign as president. The lawyer, Patricia Donovan, was a specialist in HOA law. She reviewed everything and gave us a clear assessment. The good news is that your HOA insurance should cover most of the stolen funds, minus your deductible. The bad news is that you have a lot of legally questionable actions from the previous board that need to be unwound. Violation notices that were improperly issued, rules that were never properly voted on, selective enforcement that created liability. It is a mess. Over the next few months, we worked systematically to fix the problems. We reversed all of Brenda's bogus violation notices. We reviewed and updated the HOA rules to ensure they complied with state law and were not overly restrictive. We implemented new financial controls with multiple approval requirements and regular audits. We started holding monthly community meetings where homeowners could voice concerns and ask questions. The criminal case against Brenda moved through the legal system. She initially tried to fight the charges, claiming she had every right to set up a property management company and contract with the HOA. Her lawyer tried to argue that at worst it was a conflict of interest, not fraud. The prosecution demolished that argument pretty quickly. They showed that Premium Property Services had never actually performed any work for the HOA. There were no employees, no equipment, no legitimate business operations of any kind. It was purely a vehicle for Brenda to write checks to herself from HOA funds. They also showed that she had deliberately concealed the connection between herself and the company, which proved fraudulent intent. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Brenda eventually accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to theft by fraud and embezzlement in exchange for the forgery charges being dropped. She was sentenced to 3 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 months if she made restitution. She was also ordered to repay the full amount stolen plus penalties and interest, and was permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in Arizona. The sentencing hearing was surreal to attend. I sat in the back of the courtroom and watched Brenda, who had always been so perfectly put together, stand before the judge in a jail jumpsuit. She cried and apologized, saying she had made terrible mistakes and let power go to her head. She claimed financial stress and personal problems had driven her to desperate actions. The judge was not particularly sympathetic. "Mrs. Whitmore, you held a position of trust in your community. Your neighbors elected you to serve their interests, and instead you used that position to steal from them. You created fake violations to harass people who questioned your authority. You attempted to manipulate city government processes for personal vendettas." This was not a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a sustained pattern of abuse of power and deliberate fraud. The sentence reflects the severity of your crimes. After it was all over, I walked out of the courthouse feeling a sense of closure. It had been a long, exhausting few months since that evening when I just wanted to have a peaceful bonfire in my backyard. I never imagined that Brenda calling the cops on me would eventually lead to her arrest and imprisonment. The neighborhood slowly returned to normal, or rather, to a new and better normal. Without Brenda's constant harassment and manufactured crises, people were actually enjoying living in Ridgeview Estates again. We had productive HOA meetings focused on genuine community improvements. We organized neighborhood events that people actually wanted to attend. We dealt with real issues like road maintenance and community safety in reasonable, legal ways. The bonfire incident became something of a legend in the neighborhood. New residents would hear the story and ask me about it. I would usually downplay my role and emphasize the importance of knowing your rights and standing up to bullies, even when they hold positions of authority. One Friday evening, about 8 months after the whole ordeal began, I decided to have another bonfire. I set everything up properly, just like before, with the fire ring, safety equipment, and all appropriate precautions. As the sun set and the flames began to dance, I settled into my camping chair with a beer and felt genuinely relaxed for the first time in months. Linda Chen appeared at my back gate holding a bottle of wine. "Mind if I join you?" "Not at all. Come on in." She pulled up a chair and we sat in comfortable silence for a while watching the fire. Finally, she said, "You know, you did a good thing, standing up to Brenda, I mean. A lot of people were suffering under her dictatorship, but everyone was too intimidated to do anything. I just wanted to have a bonfire without being harassed," I said with a smile. "Well, your bonfire saved the neighborhood. That should be the title of the story." We both laughed. Tom Rodriguez showed up a few minutes later, then Patricia Wells and her husband, then James Park. Before long, I had a whole group of neighbors around my fire, talking and laughing and enjoying the cool November evening. As I looked around at the faces illuminated by the firelight, I realized that this was what an HOA was supposed to be about. Not power trips and petty enforcement, but bringing a community together. Not arbitrary rules and harassment, but reasonable standards that made the neighborhood better for everyone. The irony was not lost on me that Brenda had been so determined to ban outdoor fires, claiming they were dangerous and disruptive, when in reality, this fire had brought more people together in genuine community spirit than any of her authoritarian edicts ever had. Over the following year, our reformed HOA board continued to improve things. We renegotiated contracts with service providers and saved the HOA thousands of dollars. We used those savings to fund actual community improvements like a new playground and upgraded landscaping in common areas. We revised the architectural guidelines to be less restrictive while still maintaining property values. We created a transparent process for dispute resolution that did not involve threatening people with immediate fines and legal action. Susan Montgomery did an amazing job straightening out the finances. The insurance payout had covered most of Brenda's theft, and Susan implemented accounting software that made it much harder for anyone to pull off similar fraud in the future. Every expenditure over $500 now required approval from 2 board members, and we published detailed financial reports quarterly so all homeowners could see where their money was going. I found that serving on the HOA board was actually less time-consuming than I had feared. Without the constant manufactured drama, we could handle most business efficiently in our monthly meetings. Homeowners trusted us to make reasonable decisions, and we trusted homeowners to be responsible without micromanaging every aspect of their lives. The neighborhood also developed a much better relationship with the fire department and police. We invited them to community events and worked cooperatively on actual safety issues rather than making up fake ones. We organized a fire safety workshop where I and other firefighters taught residents about defensible space, evacuation planning, and proper use of fire extinguishers. We had a neighborhood watch program that actually watched for real problems instead of just spying on neighbors over petty rule violations. One of my favorite changes was what we did with the community center. Under Brenda, it had been available for rent but at exorbitant prices that made it impractical for most residents to use. We slashed the rental fees and started offering it free for neighborhood gatherings. We set up a community library there with a take a book, leave a book policy. We organized game nights, movie nights, and potluck dinners. The building that had once been a symbol of HOA authority became a genuine gathering place. As for Brenda, I heard through the grapevine that she was adjusting poorly to prison. She had apparently tried to organize the other inmates and establish herself as a leader, which had not gone well. After a few altercations, she was moved to a different facility. Her husband had divorced her, and her adult children had largely disowned her. It was a sad ending, but entirely of her own making. The restitution payments were being garnished from her prison wages, though at the rate she was going, she would be making payments for decades. Her house in Ridgeview had been sold to help cover her debts. The new owners were a young couple with a baby, and they were absolutely delightful neighbors who actually used their backyard instead of keeping it as a pristine showpiece. I continued to have occasional bonfires, and they became something of a neighborhood tradition. People knew they were welcome to stop by, and there was something special about gathering around a fire on a cool evening, talking about everything and nothing. Kids would roast marshmallows while adults swapped stories. It was exactly the kind of simple pleasure that makes a neighborhood feel like home. The fire chief position kept me busy with real emergencies and genuine safety concerns. We had a busy wildfire season that year, and there were times when burn bans were absolutely necessary and appropriate. When those bans were in effect, I was the first to make sure my own fire pit stayed cold. The difference was that these were real regulations based on actual danger, not arbitrary rules designed to control people. I often thought about that first confrontation with Brenda, standing in my backyard while she called the police over a perfectly safe and legal fire. At the time, it had been infuriating. In retrospect, it was the beginning of positive change for the whole community. If she had not been so determined to use that incident as ammunition against me, I might never have looked into her other activities. Susan might never have examined the finances closely enough to discover the fraud. the neighborhood might have continued suffering under Brenda's tyranny for years. There is a lesson in there somewhere about how bullies often contain the seeds of their own downfall. When you abuse power long enough, when you make enough enemies, when you bend enough rules to serve your own interests, eventually someone will stand up to you. Eventually, the truth will come out. Eventually, there will be consequences. The neighborhood held a special election to permanently fill the board positions, since our initial terms were just filling out Brenda's incomplete term. I ran again and won easily. So did Linda and Tom. We were building a good team, and people appreciated having a board that actually served the community instead of ruling over it. During my acceptance speech at the annual HOA meeting, I thanked everyone for their trust and support. I also said something that I had been thinking about a lot. An HOA should never be about power or control. It should be about stewardship. We are stewards of our community, temporary caretakers working to maintain and improve what we all share. The real power does not rest with the board. It rests with every homeowner who takes pride in their property, who looks out for their neighbors, who contributes to making this a great place to live. Our job as a board is just to facilitate that and to handle the boring administrative stuff so everyone else can focus on actually living their lives. The applause was gratifying, but more importantly, I could see people nodding in agreement. This was a shared vision of what our community could be, and we were living it together. 2 years after the Bonfire incident that started it all, I was at the fire station when Mike Santos stopped by. He was there to coordinate on a joint training exercise, but after we finished the official business, he leaned against my desk and grinned. "You know, that call to your house that night is still one of my favorite stories to tell at the department. The look on that woman's face when she realized you were the fire chief was priceless." I laughed. I wish I could have enjoyed it more in the moment, but I was too annoyed at having my evening interrupted. "Well, you got the last laugh. I heard she is not getting out of prison early. Violated her parole hearing requirements or something." I had not heard that. I try not to follow her situation too closely. I am just glad the neighborhood has moved on. "Oh, definitely. My cousin just bought a house there. He says it is one of the friendliest neighborhoods he has ever lived in." That made me smile. From HOA horror story to one of the friendliest neighborhoods. That was exactly the transformation we had been working toward. As I drove home that evening, past houses where I knew my neighbors by name and where I felt welcomed and respected, I thought about how sometimes the worst conflicts can lead to the best outcomes. How standing up for what is right, even in small things like defending your right to have a legal bonfire, can cascade into much larger positive changes. I pulled into my driveway and sat there for a moment, looking at my house. It was not the biggest or fanciest in the neighborhood, but it was mine. I could paint it any approved color, park my vehicles in my driveway, have flowers of any color in my garden, and yes, have bonfires whenever it was safe and legal to do so. These basic freedoms that should have never been in question were now secure, not just for me but for everyone in Ridgeview Estates. That weekend, I had another bonfire. This time, I sent out a message on the neighborhood app inviting anyone who wanted to come. Nearly 30 people showed up over the course of the evening. We roasted hot dogs and marshmallows, told stories, and watched the stars come out above the dancing flames. At one point, Linda's teenage daughter asked me about the infamous bonfire that had started everything. I gave her the short version of the story, how a simple backyard fire had led to an HOA president going to prison for fraud. "That is crazy," she said. "All because she called the cops on you. All because she thought she could use her position to bully people and break the rules without consequences." I corrected gently. The bonfire was just the match that lit a much bigger fire, so to speak. Her dad groaned at the pun, but I stood by it. As the evening wound down and neighbors drifted home, I stayed by the fire until it burned down to coals. I made sure everything was properly extinguished, put away my chairs and safety equipment, and stood there for a moment in my backyard, breathing in the cool night air. This was what I had wanted that first night, months and months ago. Peace, quiet, the simple satisfaction of a fire well tended and an evening well spent. It had taken a journey through HOA politics, criminal investigations, and community reform to get back to this moment, but it had been worth it. I went inside, content with the knowledge that I could do this again next weekend if I wanted. No one would call the cops with false reports. No one would send me bogus violation notices. No one would abuse their authority to harass me or anyone else in the neighborhood. The rule of law had prevailed over the tyranny of petty power. The community had come together instead of being divided by a dictator. And all because I had refused to be intimidated, had stood up for what was right, and had known my rights well enough to defend them. As I got ready for bed that night, I felt genuinely grateful for how things had turned out. The neighborhood was better, the HOA was functional and fair, and I had helped make it happen. Not bad for someone who just wanted to have a bonfire in peace.